On the night Goliath was born, the world bore witness. Shooting stars filled the sky above the valley of Gath, as though they knew that an anomaly was being brought into the world that night. His birth took 3 days. After all, the human woman's body was not designed to give birth to a baby the size of a full-grown man's torso. Nobody knew who his father was. But his mother's identity revealed a lineage that reached back through generations of tragedy and choice. On the day that Goliath graced the earth, the news spread through the valley of Gath like wildfire. And by the morning of the 3rd day, the village elders had convened in an emergency council. They were worried to their bones, and for good reason. One look at the child, and they knew. The ancient blood had returned. The boy's mother, Orpah, was a descendant of the Moabites, a people with ancient ties to the giant clans, and the child's size already matched a full-grown man's torso at birth. This was a giant, a child of the Anakim and Rephaim, the ancient races of giants that once ruled with unchallenged dominance. Warriors of legendary prowess, descended from the giants that made even the bravest Israelite spies shake in their boots. The Anakim had held fortified cities that seemed unconquerable. It took Joshua himself, leading the armies of Israel with divine backing, to finally drive them from the land. And even then, some had survived, finding refuge in Philistine territory. The elders understood what having such a bloodline meant, and it excited them. A fully grown Nephilim was worth 100 ordinary soldiers. Unstoppable in single combat, a force that could turn the tide of any battle. So they gathered to answer one question. Do they raise this child as their ultimate weapon against Israel? As a champion who could crush their finest warriors and make the Philistines the dominant power in Canaan? Or do they kill him now before his strength awakens and they lose the ability to control what he becomes? The council debated for hours, but in the end, their ambition won. The charm of military supremacy was most important to them. The boy's life was spared, but after that decision, he no longer belonged to his mother. He was immediately registered as military property and became an asset of the state. The elders named him Goliath, which means the exile. When Goliath was 5 years old, he was already over 5 feet tall. The other children in the village were terrified of him and refused to play with him. Every time they saw him, they fled to their mothers. No matter how gentle he tried to be, they avoided him. Size alone made him monstrous in their eyes. Whenever they saw him, the children chanted cruel rhymes to spite him. Monster child, heaven cursed, last of the fallen, judgment burst. But the young Goliath's life wasn't entirely without joy. Though he belonged to the state, they allowed him these early years with Orpah. Even weapons begin as children. Every night she held him close, and even though she didn't fully understand what he was or how he had come to be, a mother's love ran deep, and she loved him fiercely. "You are not a monster," she whispered. "Whatever the priests say, whatever anyone says, you are my son. You are special. You are meant for something." Orpah sensed it in her son, something ancient, something powerful. She had no words for it, but she felt it in her bones. "The world is older than we understand," she told him. "There were giants once, in the days of old, people of great power. Maybe you carry something of that in you. Maybe that's why you're different." The young boy listened closely to his mother, but he still wondered. Why was he born this way? What did it all mean? She could not give him all the answers, but her love was enough, for now. On Goliath's 8th birthday, Commander Azar, a general of the Philistine army, came for him. He brought 20 soldiers as an escort. "The boy comes with me now," Azar announced. "He will be trained as a warrior. He is the property of Philistia. This is not negotiable." His mother begged, but nobody answered. It was time for the boy to fulfill his destiny. That was the last time Goliath ever saw his mother. But even though they had taken him away from her, he never forgot the stories she told him. Even as he became the instrument of the Philistines, he tightly held on to her words. He was special, and that meant something. The garrison at Gath was where boys became men. Its training was brutal, its reputation merciless. Boys who survived emerged as hardened warriors, reforged in blood and pain. And that was where Goliath was to spend the next 8 years of his life. The commanders placed his training under the watch of Master Talmai, a scarred veteran who had lost an eye in a battle against the Israelites. When Master Talmai set his eye on the young giant, his first words set the tone of the rest of Goliath's life in Gath. He said, "You need to understand something right now," Talmai told him. "You are not human, you are not Philistine. You are a tool, a weapon that we will wield against our enemies. And tools don't have feelings. Tools don't question orders. Tools exist for one purpose only, to break our enemies." For the next several years, they beat Goliath. It was training, but it was cruel. Hours of intense drilling sessions with severe consequences if he didn't perform up to expectations. Every single day, Goliath was pushed to his limits. His destiny was singular, to become the most feared warrior in all the land, a symbol of terror and despair, and a living safeguard against the threat of Israel. The Philistines did not stop until he became exactly that, or died in the attempt. But while the Philistines tried to break Goliath's body during the day, questions haunted the boy at night. He had always wondered about what he was. He knew he was different, and that he was somehow connected to the giants of old, but how? Why? What had his people been like before they were hunted to extinction? His hunger for answers led him into the shadows. Like a curious bee, Goliath sought out the keepers of the First Age. Old men who remembered what others had forgotten, who guarded the knowledge of the world before the flood destroyed everything. And so the second secret part of the young giant's life began. During the day, the Philistines trained his body for war, and during the night, he snuck away from his watchers and learned the secrets of his people from the keepers. One of the keepers, an old scholar named Jabneh, became particularly close to Goliath. The Nephilim weren't the monsters history claims, Jabneh told him. They were the offspring of something beyond human understanding. Born from the union of the divine and the mortal, they were builders, teachers. They gave humanity knowledge that jump-started civilization itself. But their power frightened the other gods, and so the flood was sent to wipe them out. "You," Jabneh said, looking at Goliath with something like awe, "you are the last echo of that ancient union. However you came to be, whether through your mother's bloodline or through something else entirely, you carry what they carried. You are the final remnant of a pre-flood world." When Goliath turned 15 years old, Master Talmai declared his training complete. At 7.5 feet tall, Goliath was the finest warrior that Talmai had ever trained. There was nobody who could hope to match the boy on the battlefield, except another Nephilim, and there were none of those left. But despite his pride in what he had created, Talmai felt a strange sorrow for the young man. He saw what Goliath could not, a tool destined to be used until broken, then cast aside. Goliath was a terror on the battlefield. A master of armed and unarmed combat, his sheer presence broke the will of entire armies before a single blow was struck. Just the mention of his name made hardened warriors lose heart. For 20 years, tales of the Philistine giant spread throughout the land like wildfire. They called him the champion of the 5 cities, and every soldier who survived an encounter with him carried the same haunting description. 9 feet, 9 inches of pure destruction, bronze armor that covered him from head to toe, gleaming in the sun like the scales of some ancient beast. The armor alone weighed over 100 pounds, yet he wore it as easily as other men wore cloth. His spear was a thing of nightmares. The shaft was as thick as a weaver's beam, so massive that it took 2 normal men just to lift it off the ground. The iron spearhead alone weighed 15 pounds. A single thrust from that weapon could punch through shield, armor, and bone as if they were parchment. But it wasn't just his size or his weapons that made men flee. It was the way he fought. Precise, brutal, unstoppable. He didn't just defeat his enemies, he obliterated them. He fought with cold efficiency, a precision that spoke of something beyond human, something forged from birth to destroy. But outside the battlefield, Goliath was alone. Every victory Goliath won made him more valuable to the Philistines, more watched, more controlled, more alone, with no friends by his side. The Philistines were as terrified of him as their enemies were. He also had no family, as his mother had passed away years ago. Guards followed him everywhere he went, not to protect him, but to make sure he never turned against the Philistines. Goliath had no other identity except to be a weapon for the Philistines. But whenever he was alone, he remembered his mother, the stories she told him, and everything he learned from the keepers. His only friend, Jabneh, had passed away peacefully in his sleep a decade ago. The other watchers had been hunted down and executed when the Philistine priests grew suspicious of their activities. The knowledge they had shared, the stories of the Nephilim, their achievements, their true history, lived on only in Goliath's memory now. He was the last of his kind, the last son of an ancient race. But through all of this, he waited. He didn't know what he was waiting for exactly, but he knew there had to be more. Some purpose beyond simply being a weapon, some meaning to being the last of his kind. That sense of waiting finally came to an end in the year 1010 BCE, when the Philistine and Israelite armies gathered on opposite sides of the Valley of Elah. The Valley of Elah was a narrow strip of land carved between 2 steep hillsides, stretching for miles like an open wound in the earth. During the rainy season, a stream ran through its center, but now, in the dry heat of summer, only a dry riverbed remained. The Philistines held the southern hillside, the Israelites held the northern ridge, and between them lay that treacherous valley floor, a killing ground where any army foolish enough to attack the other would be massacred before they finished climbing the opposite slope. It was the perfect deadlock. Neither side could advance without suffering devastating losses. So they waited day after day, staring at each other across the distance. Thousands of men, weapons ready, just waiting for someone to make the first move. The tension was suffocating. The air itself seemed to thicken with the weight of coming violence. This standoff couldn't last forever. Something had to change. That was when Commander Abner came to Goliath with a request, although both men knew it was really an order. "We need you to issue a challenge. Single combat. You versus their champion. Winner takes all. It's the only way to end this stalemate." Without a choice, Goliath obeyed. "Choose a man and have him come down to me." Goliath's voice shook the earth as he shouted at the Israelites, "If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." For 40 days, Goliath walked into the valley morning and night and issued his challenge, but the Israelite army simply stood on their ridge and watched. Not a single man moved to accept his challenge. These were not cowards. They had faced death before. But this was different. No one could face off against this monster that was taller than 2 men standing on top of the other. This was the champion of the 5 cities, the giant who had never been defeated. Day after day, the challenge went unanswered, and with each passing day, the mockery grew sharper, the humiliation of the Israelites deeper. "I defy the armies of Israel this day," Goliath shouted every day. "Give me a man, and let us fight each other." But there was no triumph in Goliath's heart. no satisfaction in watching grown men, warriors, cower at the sound of his voice. This was just another performance. Another day of being the weapon that the Philistines pointed at their enemies. Then on the 40th day, something changed. When Goliath came down into the valley on the 41st day, he quickly noticed something different about the Israelites. Their energy was different. He wondered to himself, had someone finally accepted his challenge? His hand tightened on the shaft of his large spear. Today could be the day when he could finally end this farce. Choose a man and have him come down to me. Goliath's voice boomed across the valley. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us. I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man and let us fight each other. And then, for the first time in 40 days, someone moved. But it wasn't what Goliath expected. A boy stepped forward. Not a warrior in armor, not a battle-hardened soldier. A boy, barely old enough to grow a beard, wearing a simple tunic with a shepherd's staff in one hand and a sling in the other. Goliath watched as the boy walked down the hillside and began crossing the valley floor. No armor, no sword, no shield, just a shepherd's staff, a sling, and a leather pouch at his side. For a moment, Goliath didn't know what to think. Was this a joke, an insult? Or had the Israelites finally lost their minds completely? The boy stopped at the dry streambed in the center of the valley. He bent down and carefully selected 5 smooth stones from among the rocks, testing each one in his hand before placing them in his pouch. Then he stood and continued walking toward Goliath. Then came the rage. "Am I a dog, that you come at me with sticks?" Goliath roared, his voice shaking with fury and something else, something that felt disturbingly close to humiliation. For 40 days he had stood in this valley. For 40 days he had issued his challenge. And this was Israel's answer. Not their greatest warrior, not their champion, a boy with a stick. "Come here," Goliath snarled, moving toward David, "and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." But the boy didn't run. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he called back, and his voice carried across the valley with a confidence that seemed impossible for someone his size. "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." Goliath stopped. The boy wasn't afraid. There was no tremor in his voice, no hesitation in his stance. The boy possessed a bravado that made even Goliath pause. "This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands," David declared, "and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." For just a moment, something flickered in Goliath's eyes. Not fear exactly, but recognition. This boy was invoking the God of Israel, the same God who had parted the Red Sea, the same God who had brought down the walls of Jericho, the same God who had commanded the extinction of the Nephilim. But the moment passed. Goliath was the champion of the 5 cities. He had never been defeated, and he wasn't about to be beaten by a child with a sling. Goliath moved forward, closing the distance. David broke into a run, charging straight at the giant. As he ran towards the giant, David's hand dove into his pouch, pulling out one of the smooth stones he had picked earlier. In a single fluid motion, he loaded the stone into the sling. Goliath raised his massive spear, preparing to end David with one devastating thrust. The boy would be dead before he got within 20 feet, and he would be just another body, just like the others before him. But David's sling was already spinning. He had killed with this sling before. The lions in the wilderness, the bears that attacked his father's animals. He knew exactly when to release. Goliath barely saw the stone when it left the sling. It was a blur in the air, moving faster than any arrow that had been shot at him before. He tried to crouch, turn his head, dodge the projectile, but the stone was already there. It struck him square in the forehead with a sickening crack that echoed across the entire valley like the sound of a gunshot. The world tilted. Goliath's legs buckled beneath him. His spear fell from his hand. He tried to stay on his feet, tried to understand what had just happened, but his body wouldn't obey. The ground rushed up to meet him. For a moment, there was absolute silence. 10,000 men on both hillsides stood frozen, unable to believe what their eyes had just seen. Then David ran forward. He stood over Goliath's body, grabbed the giant's own sword from its sheath, a blade so massive that David needed both hands just to lift it high above his head. The sword came down, and Goliath was no more. The boy who was taken from his mother lay dead at the hands of a shepherd boy. So fell Goliath, last of the Nephilim, in the valley of Elah.